I remember teaching my granddaughter this crust one Thanksgiving. She was convinced she needed a food processor because that is all she had ever seen on television. I handed her a fork and a bowl instead. She was sure she had ruined it when the dough looked shaggy and rough, but I told her to trust it. That pie came out of the oven with the flakiest crust she had ever made, and she has used this same method every year since. I still make crust this exact way for a good reason. It is the same method I used every morning at the bakery, rolling out dozens of crusts before the sun came up. I never needed a machine then, and I do not need one now. If it worked for hundreds of pies a week, it will work for the one pie you are making today. Let me show you what goes into it. You only need 4 things for this crust: flour, cold fat, salt, and ice water. Let's start with the flour. I always spoon my flour into the measuring cup, then level it off with the flat side of a knife. I never scoop straight from the bag. Scooping packs the flour down tighter than it should be. Before you know it, you have added too much, and that is exactly what makes a crust tough instead of tender. It is a small habit, but it makes a real difference every time. I learned that one the hard way years ago, after a batch of crust came out tough as cardboard. Next is the fat, and this is where a lot of people get confused. I use a mix of butter and shortening, half of each. The butter gives you rich flavor. The shortening gives you flackiness. Together, you get the best of both instead of choosing one or the other. Whichever fat you use, the most important thing is that it stays cold the whole time you work with it. I keep my butter in the freezer for about 15 minutes before I start. Then, instead of cutting it into cubes with a knife, I grate it right into the flour using the large holes of a box grater. That way, it goes in as small, even shreds, instead of turning soft and greasy the moment it touches my warm hands. For the salt, 1 regular teaspoon stirred into the flour is enough. It brings out the flavor of everything else without making the crust taste salty. I mix the salt in before the fat goes anywhere near the bowl so it spreads evenly instead of clumping in one spot. And for the water, I always use ice water straight from the freezer, never room temperature. I add it slowly, 1 tablespoon at a time, stirring gently between each spoonful. I never dump it all in at once. You can always add more water if you need it, but you cannot take it back out once it is in there, so it pays to go slow. Now for the mixing, and this is where most beginners go wrong, so pay close attention. Once your fat is cut into the flour and looks like coarse crumbs, with some pea-sized pieces still showing, start adding that ice water a spoonful at a time. Gently bring the dough together with your hands or a fork. Here is the part that trips people up the most. Your dough is not supposed to look smooth. It is not going to look like bread dough, and it should not feel like it either, no matter how tempted you are to keep working it. It should look shaggy, a little rough around the edges, with small streaks of butter still clearly visible. If you keep working it until it looks smooth and even, you have already gone too far. Your finished crust will bake up tough and dense instead of light and flaky. Those little streaks of fat you can still see are exactly what create flaky, tender layers once the crust hits the oven. So please do not mix them away, trying to make things look neater than they need to be. As soon as the dough holds together when you press a handful of it in your palm, you are done. Stop right there. Shape it gently into a flat disc, about 1 inch thick. Wrap it snugly in plastic and set it in the refrigerator. That is it. That is your 10 minutes of active work, start to finish, no matter how nervous you felt going in. Now let's talk honestly about the timing, because this matters more than people realize, and I do not want to mislead anyone. The 10 minutes I mentioned at the start is the active work only, the mixing and shaping into a disc. It does not include what happens next. which is chilling, and that part matters just as much as everything before it. Once your dough is shaped into a disc, it needs to rest in the refrigerator for at least 30 to 60 minutes before you try to roll it out. I usually give mine a full hour. If I am not in a rush that day, I will happily let it sit even longer, sometimes overnight. This chilling time lets the fat firm back up after being handled, and it lets the flour relax. That combination is exactly what makes the dough easy to roll later instead of sticky and difficult to work with. So while the hands-on part of this truly is just 10 minutes, plan for that chilling time too, so you are not caught off guard partway through your afternoon. While your dough chills in the refrigerator, let's talk quickly about a filling, since this is meant to be an apple pie after all. I always reach for Granny Smith apples. They hold their shape well once baked, and they carry enough natural tartness to balance out the sugar instead of turning soft and mushy in the oven. For every 6 cups of sliced apples, I use about 3/4 of a cup of sugar and a couple tablespoons of flour to thicken the juices as everything bakes. That is really all you need. Toss the sliced apples with the sugar, the flour, and a little cinnamon if you enjoy it. Let that mixture sit on the counter while your dough finishes chilling. Once your dough has fully chilled, it is finally time to roll it out. Work on a lightly floured surface. Roll from the center outward in every direction, giving the dough a quarter turn each time so it does not stick to the counter. Try to work quickly and confidently here, because the longer the dough sits out, the warmer it gets, and warm dough is much harder to manage. If the dough starts to feel warm and soft in your hands, or it begins sticking to the counter, stop what you are doing. Pop it back in the refrigerator for about 10 minutes before continuing. Warm dough is much harder to transfer without tearing, and once it tears, it is harder to patch back together neatly. So it is always worth the extra few minutes of waiting. To move your rolled dough into the pan, gently roll it up around your rolling pin, then carefully unroll it right over the dish. Press it into the corners without stretching it. Trim away any extra hanging over the edges and crimp the border however you like, with your fingers or the tines of a fork. It truly does not need to look perfect in order to taste wonderful once it comes out of the oven. Once your crust is filled and crimped, you can brush the top with a little milk or a beaten egg if you want that golden color when it bakes. It will still taste just as good without it. And that is truly all there is to making a good pie crust from scratch. 30 years of standing at a bakery counter taught me that the simple way is almost always the best way. No matter how complicated it might look in a magazine or on television, you do not need any special tools, and you certainly do not need some natural gift for baking. You just need cold fat, a light and gentle hand, and a little patience while it chills. So the next time you feel nervous about making a crust from scratch, remember this video and give it a try for yourself. I would genuinely love to know what you are baking this week, or which pie your own family asks for the most often, so go ahead and leave that in the comments below. And if you enjoyed learning this with me today, go ahead and subscribe, because we have plenty more simple, honest recipes coming your way soon.